Okay. We're ready.
It's 10 o'clock, so we'll open the meeting. This is a meeting of the Mississippi State Board of Medical Licensure Rules, Regulations, and Legislative Committee. Over the past and present, we have Dr. Lippincott, Dr. Joyner, and by Zoom we have Dr. Gersh. I guess that's all.
And Mr. Breland.
And Mr. Breland. Okay, good deal. Well, we have enough to talk to. Over the years, our rules and regs need to be changed, updated, and made more legible. Sometimes they're hard to read, even though we tried originally to write them clear enough where everybody could read them. Some of us still have trouble reading them. So we tried to make some of the parts a little more readable, a little more understandable, and make all the rules mesh with the other rules if we can. And in this, you'll find there, it's not so much rules changes as it is clarification and housekeeping stuff that we try to put in so it'll make sense. There's several items we're going to go over. One is the temporary licensure. We've discussed this from several different ways over the years, and what we're doing here is we're going to allow certain facilities associated with AC, GME, and AOA or APMA to have approved postgraduate training programs where the training programs aren't individually accredited, like Baptist Hospital having residents at Tupelo or University having residents at Grenada. And we've not really had a way to license these folks for the term of their residency training at these things. This does not allow for an exception or really change anything they're doing. It just allows us to get them a license temporarily to practice in these areas, even though they may not have one state as a whole.
So yeah, if I can just clarify that a little bit, Dr. Miles, it allows them to have a training license as opposed to an unrestricted license, which costs the resident, which, as we all know, have limited funds, a lot of money to get an unrestricted license.
Yeah, and these are in place for 90 days, and then they may be renewed for another 90 days. As you know, the rotations are different lengths. I think 90 days will probably do most of them, but if not, they can be renewed for another 90.
Actually, just to make sure we're all on the same page, this allows for a out-of-state ACGME approved program to have a 1-year training, a resident at that program to have a 1-year training license within the state of Mississippi at a site that is not, it's affiliated with the ACGME approved program, but not ACGME approved site. Does that make sense?
Right.
Okay.
And it's 90 days at the time.
No.
It's not.
It's not, it's 1 year, just like our in-state residents would be.
For example, Harry wants to put a resident in Greenville. It's a family practice program, and we're trying hard to find family practice residents to train these people in Mississippi so we can keep them. Because
Absolutely.
that's what we're addressing.
Right.
Okay.
So, and the program that brought this to a head is the Baptist program in Memphis, which has facilities in DeSoto. And they like to rotate their residents down through those facilities. In the past, they had to wait until they completed 1 year and were then eligible for an unrestricted license, and they would get them an unrestricted license, which would allow them. This will allow them to have a residence training license, just like any in-state.
This dovetails with the physician workforce work.
It does.
Establishing-
They've been heavily involved in this.
Keeps them from having to apply for an unrestricted license in the state of Mississippi, which takes a little longer. I have a note here that says Dr. Owens has joined us on Zoom. Welcome, Dr. Owens. Any other questions on the temporary license? What's the cost on that?
It's $50.
$50.
$50 license fee.
For training
For
license.
training license.
An unrestricted license application is $550.
$950. So this is going to just make these slots easier to get to. Part 2, we're going to talk about part 2615, practice of PAs, physician assistants. And one of the main things that we're trying to do here is the APRNs and the PAs, we're trying to make their requirements somewhat similar so everybody understands what they're doing here. We get a lot of calls about, I want to hire an APRN or I want to hire a PA. What have I got to do differently? And up until now, there were some differences in what they could do and what they couldn't do and who supervised them. One thing you want to make sure, the requirement that all physicians who wish to supervise PAs must work a minimum of 20 hours per week or 80 hours per month in Mississippi, excluding telemedicine. The purpose of this is twofold. We fairly routinely encounter physicians who are either retired or otherwise no longer actively practicing medicine, but who want to collaborate. This requirement gives the board a mechanism to ensure compatibility with the doctor and the PA. It also, number 2, we have begun to encounter physicians and mid-levels living entirely outside of the state, both of them, who otherwise meet the mileage and requirements. They may even be in the same office, but who have no real physical footprint in Mississippi beyond telemedicine. This makes our enforcement of problems and regulations almost impossible. If the doctor and the PA are in the same office in San Diego, California, and they're practicing medicine in Mississippi, even though they both have a Mississippi license, it's hard to discuss things with them if things come up, and this has already come up. So if you're a physician and you supervise a mid-level in Mississippi, you're gonna need to practice 20 hours a week or 80 hours a month in the state. Now, that's excluding telemedicine. If you're a physician out of state, but you don't use a mid-level in Mississippi, you do it all by telemedicine, then you're exempt from this. Does that make sense? This was confusing, and it's why we got into this. We're having a problem with docs from, say, Oregon, who have a PA working in their office in Oregon, essentially running an office in Mississippi with no footprint with either person by telemedicine. Now, you can do telemedicine from Oregon or any other state, but if you supervise a mid-level who's also supposedly doing work in Mississippi, you're going to have to come to the state and leave a footprint here.
And this levels the playing field for, say, a PA or APRN that's in Mississippi but has an out-of-state collaborator or supervisor, which under regulations right now, that physician would have to spend at least 20 hours a week in the state of Mississippi.
Correct.
So it was more difficult to actually be in state and have an out-of-state collaborator than it was for both of them to be out-of-state. And so this just more levels the playing field.
That's supposed to clarify the situation. I understand until you look at it closely, it may not, but I think if you stop and think about it, this needs to be there. Just to make sure the regulatory function of this board can work. Any questions? Dr. Rippert, Dr. Joyner.
So the doc can live on Mars, have a Mississippi license, not come to Mississippi, and supervise AP, RN, or a physician assistant that has to be in Mississippi.
They can, but they've got to commute from Mars 20 hours a week or 80 hours a month.
I like that.
Now, if they just live on Mars, as you were saying, and they do telemedicine in Mississippi, they don't really have to come here. But if they supervise a mid-level who is here, yes.
So they can practice in Mississippi through telemedicine,
Mhm. Without a mid-level.
and that counts as being in Mississippi.
Yeah, it does.
Not for this, they have to have a physical footprint to be allowed to collaborate or supervise a mid-level.
Okay, they can do telemedicine in Mississippi, but unless they come here, they can't supervise best practice.
Correct.
Correct.
I'm for that.
Yeah, we had an incident last month where the physician and the PA were within 75 miles of each other,
Down the hall.
down the hall from each other in San Diego. And they were practicing here in Mississippi, but nobody ever came. They both had Mississippi licenses. So we just needed to shore that up. And this doesn't change if you're out of state with an in-state mid-level, what you've always really had to do.
But if you're in a designated primary care practice, there's no mileage limit as long as you're within the borders of the state. Is that correct?
We're gonna get to that.
And you spend 20 hours.
That's a separate
Yeah.
20 hours.
This change is specifically for physicians working with mid-levels.
Correct.
Do you have to have a Mississippi licensed practice location? In other words, a registered address? You just can't fly in and stay at the Holiday Inn and then fly out.
You have to work 20 hours.
You would have to have an office with a physical address.
Or a facility.
Or a facility, yeah.
Okay.
We have to know, we have to have the ability to find you.
Yeah, I understand. I just want to make sure they can't send somebody to stay at the Holiday Inn and get the receipts and they go, look, I was there, that kind of thing. It's,
Have to practice.
they gotta actually be here, they gotta have a location that's designated their
Right,
practice.
and all that is already in regulations.
Yeah.
If you're supervising or collaborating with a mid-level that's in the state of Mississippi. Where the loophole came in is if both of them were with outside of the state of Mississippi. So we're just trying to close that loophole. So that it's equal for the PA and APRN that are actually here in the state of Mississippi as it is for the ones that are outside of the state of Mississippi.
I'm all for closing loopholes.
So the group that came and addressed the board at the last meeting, just kind of alleviate some of their concerns they had.
I don't specifically remember what were you talking about the PA?
Was, Dr. Payne and talked about the service they provided, which is a hybrid.
There was a company
Yeah.
that came that would like to do precisely what we're talking about, have a doctor, PA, and or mid-level in California, practice telemedicine here and all that. And the conclusion that we came up with was rather than changing our regulations to suit your business model, why don't you change your business model to suit our regulations?
Right.
Okay, so we have that down. That's Yeah.
Interestingly enough, a scenario that you could also see is you could have the doctor be here and work and meet these requirements, but mid-level be in Oregon. And they could still do that because the doctor's here.
Yeah.
This is more about our access to records, our access to collaboration documents. I don't think the board's intent is to stick an investigator on an aircraft that's in California every time we need to go get something. Our subpoenas aren't really working in California.
Right.
But the thing that we can actually control is that doctor.
That's right.
And so that's not what we want.
And the PA, not the nurse practitioner. And then, part 2630, collaboration with a nurse practitioner. Really, there's no changes here, just some changes related to wording and outdated language and related to the joint promulgation, which ended in early 2000s. We've got a lot of phone calls at night asking about what somebody can do with a nurse practitioner or what they can't do and where they have to be. And this just kind of hopefully clarifies and makes it very much like the PA language. And you can read it and understand it. Feel free to still call if you're confused. And that's the reason we have an executive director. Just call and ask the question if you're confused, but these should cut down on a lot of confusion. We've also changed a few definitions. Federal facility. We'll get that in a minute. A duty to report collaborative relationships.
What was that?
Rule 1.3. Duty to report collaborative relationships. If you're collaborating with a mid-level, you have to report the relationship through the new Mails Gateway.
Oh,
So we'll know who's working with who,
I thought they had that duty.
where. Well, you do. We tried to make that a little clearer. And you only have to do this if you're more than 75 miles apart.
Can I elaborate on that?
Go right ahead.
Thank you, sir. So Dr. Joyner, the issue has been in the past that the way the regulations read currently, it suggests that you only really need to contact this board if you're in a what's currently called a freestanding clinic situation. So we've made some changes to the definitions to take away the freestanding clinic idea, because a lot of times people get that confused with something else. But we want every relationship introduction of protocols and things up front, those apply to those, what used to be freestanding clinic situations. When they're within 75 miles, we just need you to tell us who it is, where they are. Just tell us that you have that relationship. That's it. So that's never really been explicitly spelled out, but we've always told physicians that's our expectation. We want you to tell us, but we didn't say that. So this spells that.
We've had some confusion over freestanding clinics, and everybody thinks, well, I got a freestanding clinic, it's across the street. But we're not concerned about that being a freestanding clinic. We're concerned about mileage. So we changed freestanding to extended mileage clinic. If you have a clinic that you're collaborating with that's across the street.
But that more defines the situation.
Right, right. We're concerned about being 200 miles apart. And you just have to call in and get an okay for that and make sure it's okay.
Is the extended mileage still restricted to primary care?
Yes.
There's two different scenarios. There's extended mileage, what we used to call freestanding clinic. So that's anything beyond 75. Lumped into that as a separate potential exception is primary care extended mileage, which is one of the reasons why we changed it to extended mileage. So you have extended mileage, which is what used to be freestanding clinic, and then you have primary care extended mileage. There's a different set of circumstances. If you're primary care, you don't have to submit a protocol on the front end. We just have them submit a letter saying, hey, I meet these requirements, and here's the nurses, that's it. No protocols required. You still have to have them, you don't have to produce it on the front end. That's just about process more than anything else.
So if you're outside the definition of primary care, you can still collaborate.
Certainly.
With the
Sure.
extended mileage, you just have to.
Submit your protocol and it has to be approved by the board.
And that's only common sense. If you're that far away, then you need to tell us how you're going to do your QA and how you're going to do your collaboration.
Dr. Miles, if I can interject. Can there be some separation here that says all your APRNs need to be listed?
Yes.
For these, you need protocols, and for these, you don't.
For the extended mileage claims, you need protocol.
I'm just looking at the way it's worded. When I first glanced over, it sounds like I don't have to list my APRNs who are in my office. And I have to read pretty hard to say, yeah, I do have to list them. I wonder if there's some way we can change the wording on rule 1.3 to separate those two ideas. All the APRNs need to be listed on the gateway. And then protocol being say a separate paragraph.
All the mid-levels need to be identified. It's just on those with extended mileage, you have to send all the protocols here before you go to the extended mileage. Everybody has to have it, but you should have it in your office if they're in the office with you or across the street or within 75 miles.
Yeah, that's in the first line there that you gotta add all,
It's bad.
you gotta file all your APRNs.
Just put in there and say, most bad.
So everybody's gotta have it if we ask for it. But
Yeah.
if you're over 75, you better pony it up now.
Yeah,
So
before you start.
if that's clear to y'all, it's fine with me. I'm a dummy sometimes when it comes to language. And when I read a paragraph, I go, what? Let me read that 3 times.
There is always.
These rules and regs sometimes get complex and convoluted, it seems, and all this is trying to do is clear it up, strangely enough.
And actually, it makes it easier.
Yeah.
If you look at some of the language that was struck. Previously, they were supposed to actually appear personally before the board to get permission to have these relationships. Now we're saying, just tell us about them, you know?
And it's on the licensure application.
Yes. And renewal.
What we'd really like to have is we could pull up any doctor's name on our license list, and it would, beneath his name, list the number of mid-levels he was working with and where they were. Right now, we can't do that. Conversely, I would really like to be able to pull up a mid-level anywhere in the state and find out who her collaborating or supervising doctor is.
Are you saying we can't do that, but after this, we're gonna be able to?
Eventually, when our computer
On a
system.
voluntary basis, I guess we're supposed to.
It'll get us closer.
I'll always
So why
remember,
can't we just say we're gonna do that?
Can.
I'll always remember Dr. Mitchell came here and gave us a presentation when he first got up and running, and he had the best little program, and he could point to a town on the map, and the doctors in the town would show up. Then he would hit one of the doctors' names, and all their mid-levels would show up. And I nearly fainted. I thought, man, we got it. This is what we need, and we still need that. I don't know what he did with that, but we'd like to have it.
Well, all that data was lost. It's a big saga with the Office of Physician Workforce on what happened with one of their employees who destroyed the data on the way out the door. They currently are working on new software, and it's pretty impressive. It doesn't have mid-levels on there as of now. But I would imagine that if the Office of the Nursing Workforce were willing to share that information with the Office of Physician Workforce, they could probably make that happen. Right now, it's going to be pretty interesting. Dr. Lippincott, just like you were asking earlier, you want to know all of the psychiatrists that live out of state but have a Mississippi license. You will be able to get that information when they finish the software that they're working on now. But it's not completed yet. It's still pretty raw. But that information's coming. But to go back and answer your question about why you can't do that now, is because a employee that left the Office of the Physician Workforce destroyed all that.
Unbelievable. And the reason we didn't do it then is because there was some problem with the intermixing of data, and it sounded like it was a good deal it wasn't done.
And I should tell you also, we, ThoughtSpan provides our software for licensing, and it provides the nurses with their software for licensing. And we are meeting with the Board of Nursing on how to make those two systems talk to each other so that that data will be available to both them and us. So we're working on it, but we're not there yet.
You know, it's a little surprising to me that APRNs aren't required to host their collaborating physician.
Not surprising to me. Not surprising to
It's
me.
not surprising. A discussion for another time.
Yeah. All right, now, let me, my simple mind. Right now, we don't have the ability to pull up a dot and see who's collaborating APRNs are. But as we renew licenses, why can we not say, who are your collaborating APRNs? And then next July the 1st, we have it.
Dr. Joyner, we do have that capability. It's in the system.
Okay.
The intent behind Rule 1.3 is to make sure we're capturing a certain cohort of people who don't technically under the rule at this point think they have to report it, except at renewal.
Under this change,
Right.
that will happen.
Right.
Good.
Yes, it will happen.
Yes.
So with April 1st, they have a new collaborative relationship, they need to report it April 1st.
Yeah, we would hope that they would go ahead and report it when they start the relationship, but certainly when they renew, they will have to report it. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the system will give them their previous relationships, and they can go through and say, yes, yes, not anymore, yes, not anymore. And so,
Dr. Ray, you had a large group of physicians that what they're doing is they wait till renewal. They don't make these changes until they renew. And we want them to understand that this is an interactive system. The moment it happens, go in and change it. Because you can go in, pull yourself up and see every site you've ever provided this and every nurse practitioner you've ever provided it. You can remove them, you can add them, you can do whatever you want to do. And we're trying to prompt that.
Right.
through regulation.
And then you'll be able
But
to verify,
as they go.
Yeah,
and then you'll be able to verify when you renew. This is all correct.
yeah, it'll be there. You won't have to do anything. It's already be there.
How come I was under the perception that that's the way it was supposed to be? And I think that's the way it is supposed to be, but there's a bunch out there that don't think that. That's for a different discussion also. But how did that happen?
Once we get this through, then
Yeah.
we'll send a
Yeah.
notice to all licensees, here's a change in regulation.
Absolutely.
And keep in mind that with a, perhaps a explanatory note that whether the APRN or mid-level is in your office or outside your office, we gotta know.
We need to know that relationship.
We get that information because Jonathan and Ken and David and I, every week, get 3 or 4 APRN collaboration requests or PA supervision requests, and we have to approve all the changes. I don't think we're able to put all that in at that instant. We should be able to, and know who's where. But that's a large amount of data. That we're gonna have to do it though.
But we're gonna put the burden on the physician that's collaborating or
Sure.
supervising for them to put it into the system.
Yes.
So,
We may need to remind retired doctors, you're retired, period. No fishing.
Well, we'll get to the fees later, but, I mean, I know docs that retire and, get a nurse practitioner to pay them.
Yeah, so we're coming to that.
That's that's sort of illegal.
Yeah. I was thinking about starting that next week, but I don't know.
Under the rule 1.5, number 2, the physician is in a compatible practice with the nurse practitioner. I'm just curious why we're deleting that.
That is already,
I know in the above, it talks about the protocols, compatibility
I
of
think it's
practice.
been moved to definitions.
And, I was looking at that also, I had the same question. But if you look at number 1, it says between a primary care physician and a primary care nurse practitioner.
we're addressing it.
They may be extending, that means that is the same. Is
The
that what?
definition encompasses mental health.
Rule 1.4, so that's right above it.
Right.
The facts and matters to be considered by the board regarding any collaborative relationship, not just those that are beyond 75 miles, all of them,
Yeah, the compatibility. of practice.
compatibility. So we're covering it in one fell swoop in one place.
But if we left that in and didn't strike it out, it wouldn't hurt.
No, it wouldn't hurt. Good with it.
The idea is just to simplify the language if possible. And it's, you can only simplify this so much and still say what you want to say.
It does no harm to leave it in.
No,
So leave number 2, Neil?
I see no harm in leaving it in, and I think it may be useful. So,
It doesn't say it has to be the exact same, especially you're just compatible. And y'all right now.
Doing the reassignment to hormone therapy, as your collaborating physician do that
So
too.
we had a perfect example this week come up with a PA that was gonna be doing wound care, and the collaborator supervisor was an OBGYN. So we dug a little deeper to make sure that OBGYN was also involved in wound care, not just doing OBGYN and starting a wound care
Much like
clinic
where
somewhere.
it is.
Right, so, and it turns out they do. They're certified in hyperbaric medicine, and they do wound care outside of OBGYN, so that made them compatible.
well, let me
But at
give,
first, it raises a flag in your mind, like, is that
We did
really?
it on that.
But y'all were able to determine that.
We did,
Yes.
yes.
See, I'd like to have that over.
let me give an illustration. I do family practice. Those guys in Indianola do family practice. They deliver babies, I don't even want to go near them. And so that's not really compatible. And so if you're gonna train, you need to train somebody compatible in your practice.
Right.
Correct.
So we'll leave that in.
Can the record just reflect that there's nothing wrong with babies?
I love them after you clean them off and bring them out.
Being an OBGYN, I don't know why any family practitioner would want to get into that business. It's
I don't either.
a lot of night work he doesn't have to do.
I promise if they let me out of the delivery suite at the university, I would never go back there.
Okay, where are we?
Federal facility.
Okay, I think the main thing here, is we want people to report all the collaborative relationships, so we'll have a track here on this. See where we're gonna do. Extended mileage, freestanding.
Is this going to satisfy the folks at the federal facility?
I hope,
Well, we took their recommendations and kind of used their recommendations, what they would like to see, in consideration when we wrote this. So I would hope that it does.
I hope so too.
they were concerned that we were gonna have oversight over their mid-levels. And we reassured them we don't, and we're not going to. As long as their mid-levels stay in that facility. If they do mid-level work outside of that facility, yes, we are gonna oversee. And they'll have to meet all these requirements.
And the last sentence, I think, is really important to what their concerns were. Like if their name appears on the chart with an APRN that doesn't associate them with having a collaboration with that APRN's work.
That's up to them. We're not gonna go over there and review VA charge for any reason at all.
So I don't see that sentence as even any of our business.
And you're correct,
If somebody gets sued.
but they wanted it clarified.
Yeah,
Okay.
They asked for it to be in writing, and so
Yeah.
we're just
It
giving
says,
it to them in writing.
They
it
came
says
over
we
here
don't have any
twice
business getting in your
with big
business.
questions.
yeah.
Right.
So,
We're not gonna get in your business no matter what, as long as you stay in that facility. And,
if you supervise mid-level in Clinton, then
Yeah.
you need to report that.
Exactly.
we have had some doctors over there supervise mid-levels in Madison County and Hines County. And once they realized what their obligations were to do that, they decided not to do that.
Yeah, that's malpractice insurance, that's all kind of stuff.
And the
But this-
hours you got to spend.
Yeah, but this also applies to the reservation, Keesler.
Any federal government. That's just a clarification of the law, really, federal law. Quality improvement and billing for collaborative oversight. If you work with mid-levels who aren't employed by you or your employer, or receive a check from them, and they hire you to be their collaborative doc or their supervising doc. We've had some problems with, believe it or not, billing. How much do you charge? How much can you charge? So we tried to even it. Now that's just for these clinics where the mid-levels go outside of their office to hire or engage a supervising doctor or collaborating doctor, and they pay him for the time he spends reviewing charts, quality assurance, and collaborating. And we decided that to set a guideline at essentially reasonable market value, market rate for a medical director in other areas. What's the going rate for a medical director at the university? Or Dr. Joyner's going rate?
Can't tell you
You're gonna have to
How
touch
does
it.
it matter?
You got,
Whatever the market will bear.
whatever the market.
If some entity asks you to do a chart to find out if there's some malfeasance in here, or what's the question, what happened with doctors, what, about $250 an hour?
A reasonable rate, anywhere from 150 to 250, I don't, and it,
So this concern is brought up by the nursing associations that their nurse practitioners are being gouged by physicians for collaboration fees.
Why is that? They're in a competitive market.
So
I don't get that,
to-
because they don't have to pay to pay.
To help address their concerns so that we don't have a change in legislation that would have a bigger effect, we are trying to help address some of those concerns.
The bigger effect I won't mention right now, but it concerns the loss of regulatory control, right?
I think this is one where we really need to tread carefully because I think that the problem is that they're kind of like with most of what we do, a few bad apples can really spoil the whole bunch.
I agree with that. There's different people have different opinions downtown.
if you're doing primary care and there's no mileage restriction, you should be able to shop around your collaborative agreement and get bids on it. You're not stuck with the guy there in town if you think he's too high. And you might a contract to pay the amount you want to pay or the amount you're willing to pay. Now, if you sign a contract that you're gonna pay somebody $1,000 an hour, I don't think we have any say in that. I mean, that seems a little bit high to me.
No, I agree. That's what I meant by they're in a competitive market. There's all kind of docs out there.
Right.
There's no restrictions about where they can go to get these docs, so they got to be Mississippi licensed doc if they're going to conduct business in Mississippi. I don't see where we need to get into it. Other than the concern.
Well, it's kind of an ethical issue.
It is an ethical issue, but that went out the door when this whole thing first started and APRN started hiring doctors. That to me was a major ethical issue.
Well, that's kind of where we are. The APRNs are hiring doctors. How much should they pay them? And should we get involved in how much they pay them?
We don't get involved in how much docs get paid.
So it very carefully does not designate a specific amount.
Right.
It just gives some guidelines that should be used. This is a specific request to address an issue to avoid change in legislation.
All it says is, may only bill at reasonable rates consistent with fair market value.
I don't think that eliminates competition, so
It
I
doesn't.
don't have. I don't have
Can
any problem.
I have a question? Where's the well, what does enforcement look like, and what are ramifications for violations of this if we actually put it in writing?
It seems like an unenforceable contract.
Should we maybe
So,
change the wording to
there
like
are-
are encouraged?
There are guides that all the hospitals use as to how much they're willing to pay a medical director of a specific service. So like if you have a bariatric program and you have a medical director of that program, they will have a designated amount that they will pay that medical director per hour based on fair market value. And there is a book that will tell you the ranges of what fair market value are.
But that's a guide. They can pay more if they want.
Yeah.
They can pay more if they want to.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we're saying y'all can go by the guide if you want to, but if you want to pay more, you can do that too.
I'll just stick by my previous statement that this is a solution to a specific request.
We need to be
That's not
clear
the word
that,
starts with an E.
that the fee you pay a medical director can also depend on what you're asking him to do. If he's the medical director of a general practice office, if he's the medical director of a group of mid-levels doing neurology. That's a whole different animal right there.
But on the other foot, if we do say you need to stay in these parameters that are published, are we opening ourselves up to somebody coming in and saying, y'all are trying to restrict what we can do?
I think by using the
Down
word,
here in this
we need to get away from that word.
this last sentence where it says physicians who collaborate like that may only bill, I think the may only should be struck and,
Should,
should
Good.
negotiate at reason. Should negotiate considering reasonable rates.
I think the only thing we could say if there was a outlier here is if it was brought before us, we could say this doesn't fall within the accepted guidelines. But we can't void the contract or reduce the pay. We don't have that authority. But we could say, yes, we agree this is a usual amount, or no, we don't.
So if Dr. Ray's suggestion, starting after collaboration, comma, we would change that, should negotiate reasonable rates consistent with fair market value.
Consider.
I like that. But here's another question. Are we going to get inundated with people complaining about how much they got to pay people, and then we're going to have to adjudicate that stuff? Because, I mean, I'm just trying to think down the road, what kind of hole we're digging for ourselves, if it's a shallow one or a deeper one, more grave-like. I'm just interested to.
We're already in the hole. We're just trying to,
I think.
we already have these complaints. We're just trying to,
I think we're trying to stay neutral in all.
yeah, we'd like to stay on the road.
Because all that counts real well if you're trying to hire a physiologist and you get all these physiologists come in and say, I'll do it for this, this, and this. Then Arthur Guyton walks in and says, I'm gonna do it for $1 million. You may just hire him.
Mhm.
Because he's gonna bring all kind of stuff to you. He's gonna bring grants and everything else. So when you start telling people, you need to use this parameter to pay, you need to use this parameter to pay, I think you need to look at what it's worth you to hire that person. And I'm not sure they're serving themselves well by asking this.
I would agree with that, and with the changes we've made to that last sentence.
The word should.
If we did charge somebody with gouging, say, they would have the right to come in and say, well, I know my price seems high, but look at what all I brought to the table. And then it would be the 9 board members' decision to decide whether that was gouging or not.
But I know my price is high, but they decided to pay it. I just don't think how they enforce it.
In all sorts of shortages and other things outside the realm of medicine and the realm of economics. And there are people who will actually argue with good reasoning, is there such a thing as gouging, given the circumstances? So to use.
It seems like this is covered on the other end by antitrust. In other words, all the docs can't get together and say, we're only going to be hired for this much or more.
Right.
Then that's antitrust. You can't do that.
Right.
But as far as hiring one doc, you need to negotiate with that doc and figure out what you want to pay.
Hey guys, I think that it probably is a really good idea, at least to establish, like, so we don't have to worry about the ceiling. We just got to worry about the floor. And just to say that, because as it stands right now, there's not anything that anybody has to go on. And so people who feel that it's fair or unfair, there's not really anything to determine, or there's no standard that exists to really kind of measure that against. So at least this does give the opportunity to come up with something to measure it against. And fair market value is something that is widely utilized in larger health systems. And where you look at the the means and the medians, and then also kind of what from surveys across the country and also for your particular area, what people are being paid and all that. That is that information is actually easy to obtain, and fair market value is always based on the area in which you're practicing. So I think that it at least would help us to have something like this, because as you're getting these complaints, you don't really have a way to evaluate them except for, wow, that seems high, or wow, that doesn't seem high. And that's not what I think we want to do as a board. So while this still, I think, gives flexibility and people figuring out what they need and how much they're willing to pay for it, but it at least establishes a floor from which we can determine whether or not people are actually being exorbitant in their requests, because at least we have some numbers to go on and it's an accepted industry standard. That's how it sounds to me. I get totally how much you're saying with not trying to get into people negotiating, people willing to pay and trying to tell people what they should or should not make. But at least for us in examining claims or concerns, it gives us the measure to be able to determine whether or not those are reasonable or not. And it's something that is not something that we made up, but something from the industry that we're already utilizing that will kind of help us, and I think probably give us a little bit more firmer footing as we are trying to discuss these matters.
Can I be the devil's advocate?
I will be too in just a second. Oh,
Well, mine's more of a positioning within the document, so let's go ahead and discuss the wording.
I was gonna say, I like the should, and should leaves it up to them. But by us saying, you need to look at these parameters and stay within these parameters and look at the market rate and all that, by the board saying that, could it be construed as we're violating antitrust? That's a big deal.
Well, that would always be, the final decision for that would lie with the OLRC.
Yeah, but we don't want to see anything in LRC that's violating, I mean, we don't want
Well,
to.
I personally don't think it is, but the final arbitrator of that would be the OLRC. I mean, that's the whole purpose of the OLRC, is to keep boards in line and prevent them from passing anything that would be considered antitrust.
But I'm good with should, and we need to make the OLRC do their job and tell us whether it's okay.
Well, so the way I have it written now is, after collaboration, comma, should negotiate at reasonable rates considering the fair market value.
and we need to understand here that if somebody comes to us with a complaint that says this doctor is charging us above fair market value, that we have no regulatory ability to do anything to the doctor at all, except just to say, well, I agree, that's a little high. That's as far as we can go.
We say that about you.
And this came up. I've been on the board, I guess, not anybody here. When we started having the mid-levels open a clinic and hire a doctor to be the collaborator, and we ran into competition, they might hire the doctor who has a medical office across the street, and he considers the mid-level clinic with 5 mid-levels competition. He may charge them more than the going rate because he's working for his competition. And we got into that pretty deep. So I don't know how much regulatory activity we can do on this other than just to say, y'all play nice now.
It's an unenforceable regulation.
It's unenforceable. We can't.
I would disagree with that.
You think we can enforce it?
I do.
How?
Well, let's say that you're collaborating with a nurse practitioner and doesn't have any other options. Okay, we know that's not the case, but let's just say that. And you say, You ain't got no other options. It's gonna be $500 an hour. When we know the reasonable going rate is $150 an hour. Okay, we would be able to charge that doctor with a violation of this very regulation.
That's clearly what it said. The very next rule is violating.
No, she can say, no, I'm not gonna do that.
She can say that. But
She can say that. She does not have to hire him. I don't care if he's the only one around.
She doesn't have to be right in this neighborhood. She can go down the coast and find somebody.
Yeah, because when you graduated from med school, you look for a place to go, and you're not gonna go someplace you can't practice. I just don't get that as a.
There are plenty of regulations that are a tall hill to climb for us to bring charges against a physician. That doesn't stop us from keeping those things in regulation. So while it may be a tall hill to climb, the intent and the purpose of it will still be conveyed, and it will send the message that we are watching. So just because it would be a tall hill to climb doesn't mean that we wouldn't be able to climb it.
Well, I agree with all
Should
that.
we leave it?
It would be hard on us to sit here at this dais and look at a doctor and say, you're charging too much. I mean,
Would just
I'm an OBGYN, to me, the orthopedists charge too much. I mean, they were expensive.
Just like any other licensee, they would have the right to defend themselves and explain why they think they were worth more than fair market value. And if it's Arthur Guyton and he brings in a ton of business to that group, then that would be the board's purview to decide, well, that makes sense, so he's not gouging them. Or that doesn't make sense, so he is gouging them. But I just will remind y'all that this is a request.
Yeah, I think it needs to be addressed in our regulations. Just.
Well, I think you're right. We should put should and run it through whatever board that was.
OLRC.
OLRC. And let them tell us whether we have any standing with it, and if they do, then when
Well,
somebody
and
comes in
I will
with a
say this
complaint.
also, between this meeting today and tomorrow, I can have Stan Ingram take a look at it and tell me if he thinks it's antitrust or not.
I'd like to remind everybody though, that the OLRC is an attempt to keep this board from being sued for antitrust matters.
Yeah.
It's not a guarantee.
Well, this rule is an attempt to avoid monopolistic behavior.
Is it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I mean, so just to clarify what you were talking about just then with the OLRC, if the OLRC approves it and passes it, this board does have state protection. If it's cleared by the OLRC, the only time you would not have state protection is if the OLRC said, no, I disagree with that, and y'all say, screw it, we're gonna pass it anyway.
By state protection, you don't mean sovereign immunity, you mean the state will provide a defense for you if you're sued. It doesn't mean they will win.
We have an attorney general rep, so.
That's correct.
Speak, that's correct, and I knew I was right. Because I thought about this before, when the North Carolina came up, they will provide a defense.
Do you think this is antitrust?
I do not, but
You do not.
I do not, but I also think it is twofold. If you send it and it passes and something occurs, then not only will we defend you, but you also have the defense to the claim. Is that the OLRC passed it, of course, and they didn't see anything wrong with it. And it is to protect against monopolistic behavior.
This is not arbitrary and capricious, but
I have a question. We can't require a physician to work and collaborate if they don't think they're getting paid enough. So there's really no enforcement. What I would like to see is guidelines. And then if the nurse practitioner and the physician wish to continue, they get an outside arbitrator to work out the details using those guidelines. And then
That's
I don't know if it-
contract law.
That's planning your divorce before you.
I'm a Dr. Joyner, we've got, what, 9,000 doctors in this state? Yeah, surely you can find somebody who'll work on
And with the calamity rules that you can go over 75 miles, the possibility of a monopoly is out the
It
window.
evaporates.
Yeah.
But I agree, this is a request from the nursing
It's a request from the legislature.
legislature.
To answer the concern of nursing associations that their nurse practitioners are being gouged.
Do we have any examples?
Of course not.
Of course not.
But you have to understand, this would only apply to a limited number of nurse practitioners anyway, because most nurse practitioners are employed by the physician that they work with or for anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
Employed by.
or employed by the hospital, or, you know, so we're really talking about a very small minority of nurse practitioners that this would even apply, and physicians that collaborate with those nurse practitioners that this would apply to.
These are the entrepreneurial nurse practitioners.
Yeah.
The words too big.
Who would like to practice independently anyway.
Yes.
I noticed the other day,
Probably better negotiate.
a notice from another state where the state required the CRNAs to have a collaborative, they require them. And a lot of times they aren't in the same hospital. So this would be something that would crop up there probably. And I don't think you're gonna get an anesthesiologist to collaborate and do all the QA for $150 an hour.
Well,
They get that much for doing a DNC.
I know doctors that don't charge anything.
Yeah.
Well,
Because
that's the other situation, and that situation occurs a lot where the doctors don't charge anything.
Yeah, like I'm one of them.
part of their
What am I doing wrong?
If your hospital pays the mid-levels and pays you too, you shouldn't be charging anything. But now this is the other end of this. If we're gonna set how much they can charge, that's ergo, they're gonna have to charge something.
Not necessarily.
We're not setting how much they can charge.
Right.
We're not saying they have to
Because you
charge.
choose to charge.
What it all boils down to is we're gonna pass a regulation that we can't enforce, that we have no parameters to enforce, that we can't violate the nurse's ability to hire a doctor at whatever fee they want to hire them at.
Tom, this is to prevent the legislature from passing a law
Let's do it.
that says,
But
that
we need to understand there's no way we can do anything about it once we pass it.
what's wrong with that?
I'm fine.
I would
I'm
still
good with it.
disagree with that statement.
can we ask the nursing board, the legislature, egregious cases where they think nurse practitioners have been, abused financially, and let us look at it. So we may want to answer, we looked at it and it's not really a problem. I mean, they're making an allegation and, we're accepting it.
Yeah, I think the problem is that if without this, how are you going to make that determination? It will be entirely arbitrary based on what we think and what we feel. You got to have some numbers to it. You can't just say, well, give us your complaints and we'll look at it and decide based on what. I mean, I think that in my limited view of what we've been talking about, which I think we've kind of covered a whole lot of other concerns, but fundamentally, you have no way, no truly objective way to evaluate that claim without something like this. Without it, it is entirely arbitrary. With it, you at least have a floor. And we don't care about the ceiling, and we're not getting into contract negotiation, all that other crap. but you have no way to evaluate. What are we going to use to look at it? If we told them, send us your complaints, then we could sit around and we could gut check ourselves and figure out based on whether we think it makes sense or not. And I think that that's really dangerous for a regulatory agency to start making decisions about whether or not something is reasonable based strictly on how we feel. This provides some measure that is acceptable to determine a base point for being able to evaluate the claims. I think without it, you don't have it. And if somebody else comes up with it, then we're stuck with it regardless. And we're still going to have to enforce it, but we're going to do it based on somebody else's decision-making process that may not be as familiar with the way that these things work, and probably will be more concerned about winning than about what we're trying to do in the interest of safety and fairness.
I think to serve that purpose, I'm for it.
Let me ask you, Attorney General, the one word we want to get away from here is arbitrary. We want to, I guess, have some sort of guidelines so that our decision won't be arbitrary. If somebody comes in and says, this doctor is charging me too much, then we can't say, well, we'll agree with you. On what ground? Well, we just think that you can't do that. It's got to be, we got to have some guidelines, and I guess this is a way to do it. Because it cannot be arbitrary, or we lose.
Right, and I think this is what keeps it from being arbitrary, is that we use this reference guide that is stated in the footnote, or a similar resource in case that one goes historic and the new one comes along. That's why we put the similar resource in there. So it gives guidelines as to how you would make these decisions of whether there was gouging or not. And
And if there's a complaint, the doctor could come in and say, $150 to $175 an hour, that's for family practice. I'm a neurosurgeon. I want $300 an hour. So he would have that ability to come in.
absolutely. So, I mean, just like with any other violation of the regulations, this goes on every week here in this agency. So we think we have somebody who's violated a regulation. We bring them in, we talk to them, we give them a chance to defend themselves. Based on those conversations, if we still think they're in violation and that they don't have a good defense for what they've done, then we bring it before the board. Okay, so it would be a multi-layered process before it ever got before the board.
I don't think it would ever come here.
But
I don't see a scenario where that would ever come here. But I hope not. But somebody would have to stake out a part of the state where he's the only doctor there, run everybody else off, and establish his own parameters, and then say, I'm the guy, and you're going to have to pay me tons of
So
money.
I hear what you're saying.
And it's not going to happen.
What you're saying is we're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I understand that.
But I also understand what you're saying is we're trying to placate, maybe I should say
And I
that out
think,
loud.
I think
but
Dr.
I'm all for that.
Dr. Owens put it very,
I think she did. I do.
that we can either decide the language that we're going to try to have to enforce, or somebody else can decide it for us.
I think so.
Can we get the nursing groups to send us an example or send us a problem?
Have we had any complaints?
We have not had any complaints. Complaints have been made to the legislature.
It's like all these guys that get sent to prison, they don't have any board actions because nobody complains.
No, it's like this. It's like when you're married and you got stepchildren and they don't come ask you, they go ask the mom.
Yeah.
And then she comes and asks you. And she rules.
Oh,
I want to make a couple of suggestions. I think to make it clean, we need to move the billing for oversight into a separate section, maybe under Rule 1.6, just have it as a standalone, not group it with quality
Quality
improvement, because it
improvement.
doesn't really fit there. And then
Yeah, you're
move-
probably right.
And then move federal facilities to the end after the violation of the rules so that it's clear that this is like, you know, a separate, not exemption, but just a clarification, but it's not, there's no violation of it. Does that make sense? So I've moved the federal to the end and put the physician collaborative, the billing issues where federal facilities. And then on the example, on the footnote, I've removed as an example because general public's gonna see that and say, they're saying we can only charge $150 to $175 for our services.
Right.
I don't think we need that example.
That's in the year 2020.
So I just think we don't need, we have the reference to the footnote, I don't think we need to give that as an example. We could have pulled any other number out of there. But we pulled that number as an example, so it's confusing. It looks
Yeah.
like that's what you're
Yeah,
trying
I
to.
agree.
I wouldn't-
Next year it may change.
Yeah, I wouldn't put any numbers
I
on
wouldn't put
the,
a number there.
wouldn't put any dollar numbers on there.
All right, so change the 1.6 federal facilities to 1.8 and make the whole thing about charges of collaboration number 1.6. Is that,
Right, put the charges at 1.6 and then put, I guess make a rule 1.9 after the
For
violation.
quality improvement,
So do the-
Okay, I've got another question about the extended mileage clinics. Is this a new rule about, we've had the rule about they must have electronic medical records, but this is to stipulate that the collaborator has direct access to the electronic medical record of the
Yes.
HDRN. Is that gonna be a hardship for anybody, or I don't?
it's implied already. We're just clarifying the language.
But if you're less than 75 miles, you don't have to have an electronic medical record, is that correct?
Right.
Okay. That's what I was wondering.
This is just if you want to apply for that specific exception.
Extended mileage.
Primary care extended mileage. That's the only part where we say you have to have access to the nurse practitioner or PA's EMR. If they're outside of 75 and you're not asking for the primary care extended mileage, you can do that however you see fit, so long as we approve the protocol. The primary care extended mileage, the specific subset of an exception, that's the one where we're saying you gotta be primary care and primary care. It can't be some other relationship. And you have to have an EMR that you can directly tap into real time to work with that nurse practitioner or PA if there's a problem. That's the idea.
But if someone is not primary care and they're over 75 miles, they have to apply.
Yeah, they don't have access to this.
And their protocol has to be approved.
has to
The
be-
protocol has to be approved.
That's right.
Maybe
And the problem we're running into here is they both had EMRs, but the EMRs weren't compatible. So that's like, nobody has an EMR.
That was a loophole.
Yeah, that was a loop. That closes a loop.
Trying to close.
So rule 1.4 applies to physicians who are non-primary care collaborators.
Correct.
Maybe. City mileage collaboration for non-primary care collaborators.
And like we said, starting off, this is mainly housekeeping and hopefully clarifying implied relationships and implied needs that weren't clear. Like EMRs, they gotta talk to each other.
For most collaborators, and this is gonna amount to what, an hour a month for reviewing charts and a face-to-face meeting quarterly. We're not talking about big bucks here.
I agree.
But some docs are getting big bucks. I get that impression that some docs are getting big bucks from nurse practitioners.
There are some that are making several $1,000s a month per nurse practitioner.
And that's,
Nurse practitioners, parents were making a lot of money.
yeah,
Look, I'm all for people making money, and I'm not against people making money. We're addressing a specific request.
and basically unethical behavior.
Yes.
I really would like to see
Say
some,
that again for the people in the back who might have missed it.
Sorry.
I
What
just
was,
say that again for the people in the back who might have missed it. The ethical part.
Well, you know, thousands of monthly for being a collaborator, that it doesn't reflect well on the profession, in my opinion. You know, like I had an acquaintance who retired and started getting, you know, a few $1,000 a month for supervising a nurse practitioner. But we've also changed the rule that the collaborator has to be in active practice 20 hours a month, 20 hours a week. Yeah.
Well, I think the other part to consider though is there are some financial risks, I guess, that are being taken on by collaboration, because then you become responsible or share responsibility for the actions of another individual. And so I do believe that, for example, if that translates into higher malpractice premiums and those kinds of things, then I could see that being a consideration, and that might actually justify some compensation for that. But again, it just needs to be thought out and reasonable. And I think that, as we move forward, that'll probably be a part of what we hear as it pertains to these kinds of cases.
Have we had any knowledge of any cases where doctors were sued for an APRN's malpractice?
I'm not aware of it.
I mean, it does seem that as the captain of the ship doctrine, that the physician is legally the captain of the ship, is he not?
That has happened with CRNAs. I'm not aware of any.
But it is a risk that has to be taken into account. Yeah.
Well, one thing's for sure, if we've never seen this situation we're talking about occur before, and we're getting requests from the place we're getting requests from, then somebody's thinking about it.
Are you gonna call the question?
yeah. So we're gonna vote on this. I guess we'll have to,
Okay, are we gonna put in the word should?
or shall.
Does that allow a little more wiggle room than the word may?
Yeah, shall negotiate rates.
Shall is like.
It says
Should.
not-
That means you will do.
What is-
Shall is more, is.
Yeah.
A mandate.
Stronger than may,
Yes.
Or should.
should,
Yes, strong, should.
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 Okay.
Yeah, because shall is directive.
The way I have it written right now is collaboration, comma, should negotiate at reasonable rates considering the fair market value.
Is that weaker than may only, Bill? Is that weaker than
Using
may?
the word only would potentially get us into the antitrust arena.
Okay.
I have should negotiate rates consistent with fair.
Reasonable also. And then strike the footnote, stop after similar resource,
Yeah,
starting with as an example.
if you give somebody an example, for sure they're gonna use it.
Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah.
all right.
No good deed goes
That's right.
They'll say, you mean I can only charge you $175 an hour?
Or I have to charge it. It would be interesting to see who brought this up, but we probably never will know. That's okay. Any questions about what we have done today? We've not really changed a lot. It's a minor changes, like on this past thing with shall negotiate. But we've not really changed much at all, other than to clarify. So to summarize, temporary licensure. That's for the residents to be able to go to hospitals here in the state when their hospital needs to send them here. Physician assistants and the APRNs try to make their requirements much more compatible. A few definition changes. The supervising doc, mileage limitations, changes in freestanding and extended mileage. The changes, not really changes, but the clarification on the federal facility and the fact that we will not do anything with them. We will not investigate them or you need to report collaborative relationships. We already had that. Just to clarify that you need to do that. Extended mileage, and then the billing thing. John?
Just as a bit of clarification, and I'm sure this is what you want, there was a decision made to leave in the compatibility statement on primary care to the nurse. We want to do the same in the PA section.
Yes.
I want to make sure
Yes.
that's right.
Are we ready for a motion? Please.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? What the motion?
The motion is to approve rules as presented.
As you just
And
said.
modify. And amended.
And amendments. Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Oh,
All opposed?
Aye.
One late aye. All opposed? The rules amendments are changed.
Is Dr. Owen still our nursing board representative?
Yes.
So I hear from some doctors in a hospital setting that the nurses push back on doing the face-to-face with them because their rules and regs don't require that they participate in the quality improvement program. So I don't know if maybe that's something that Dr. Owens could just take to the nursing
Can we
board.
discuss that at another time?
Sure. Anyway, that's,
It should include that.
We have some horrible examples.
I mean, I hear it.
Well, I'll be seeing you guys in a little bit. So I'd be happy, if you just want to sidebar, talk about it, we can talk about that because I think the next meeting is in October, I believe. So if there's something that we need to take back to them or some other, and even if it's just to kind of go a little bit further into some of the complaints or some of the issues that we discussed earlier today, I'm fine with that. Just tap me on the shoulder and I can figure it out.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
If there's no other questions of business, the meeting adjourned.
So are we doing the